Hello everyone. Off the bat, I need to warn you. There is going to be some profanity in this video because it's a bit of a rant. So I do not recommend this for kids. And if that's sensitive to you, feel free to skip it. I don't care. And normally I would say, hey, it's not wise to speak about something when you're in that state of mind because passion overrules logic. Well, in this case, I've spent time writing this script out completely. I'm just going to read it verbatim, and that means that I've had time to think over, reflect upon what I'm saying, gather the logical processes together, and still engage with the passion the subject is due, because it is important. For the longest time, I have defined myself as a political conservative. This is a bit ironic because a while back I remember watching an interview with Milton Friedman, the famous economist, and someone asked him if he was a conservative. He responded that he was not, because the last thing in the world he wanted to do was conserve the present state of affairs. And that is the same position I am in. However, most of his views, and correspondingly most of my own, are what would typically be called the conservative spectrum on the political scale, which highlights problem number one. Labels are bullshit. They're completely worthless. They mean the exact opposite of what they are supposed to mean, and this is intentional. This is propaganda and manipulation through distortion to try to trick people, to try to obfuscate, and to try to blind. This is not clarity, and it can only be happening intentionally by people who want to pretend to be something they know they are not, in order to fool enough morons into complying with their goals as hapless sheep. But for years, I've been fine telling people that I am a conservative, knowing full well that the definition of the term has been bastardized into something unrecognizable, because I basically concluded language is defined by its usage, and this is how we use the term now. But if you want to actually be accurate, I'm closest to what would be considered classical liberalism, such as the views held by the founding fathers, particularly those like Jefferson and Madison. This liberalism gets to the actual root of the word liberal, which is based on freedom, and I strongly stand for individual freedom and the rights of individuals. Enough of this collective identity that permeates our world today. I am not a collective. I am myself. But, and here's the thing, I no longer wish to even pretend that the label conservative applies to me. Not just because the meaning of the word is the exact opposite of what I hold to, but because those who hold to the banner of conservatism today are, not to put too fine a point on it, fucking idiots. This started coming to light towards the end of Trump's presidency, and when it became quite clear that these who are predominantly conservative begin to fall for every single conspiracy theory surrounding the election that they could. They went out of their way to find conspiracy theories to fall into, especially the more outrageous the conspiracy theory got. Then they bought it even more. And as I said at the time, and I will say it again, YouTube should not be banning people who hold those views, because I know I could have easily fallen into some of them as well. Some of them seemed quite a bit plausible, like how the voting pattern seemed to violate Benford's law. It took a video response from Matt Parker of Stand Up Maths to demonstrate why Benford's law didn't apply here. And as such, I was able to update my knowledge and can now refute that claim. But if YouTube had banned all those videos right from the start instead of afterwards, Parker would not have known he needed to produce that response, and I never would have been able to learn the truth, and I would have thought Benford's law did apply. And that gets me to my main point here. My ultimate fidelity is to what is true. At the end of the day, I don't care what label you throw on my views. I only care that, to the best of my abilities, what I believe is based on what I know is true. That I am making rational decisions based on the available input, and that I'm looking at alternative perspectives to address my own blind spots, which I know exist. Everyone has them. That is completely absent from the conservative movement today. No one in that camp gives a damn about what is true. They only care about opposing leftists. They don't know the first thing about what leftism is, mind you. They just know that they need to oppose it. Now look, this is true for people on the left wing just as much as it is true for those on the right wing. But I don't care about people on the left wing. That's for them to figure out. I care about what people who claim to be on my side of the political spectrum are doing and acting like. It used to be that conservatives were identified as those who were intellectual, who thought about issues, who pondered the matters, who made weighty decisions, who figured out the logic of what was going on. It takes actual thinking to do that, and there were a great many conservative spokesmen in the past who were quite capable of doing this heavy lifting. But conservatives as a whole, the only thing you know how to do is regurgitate something you heard Jordan Peterson once say, or that you heard on Louder with Crowder, or that you got from some rerun of Rush Limbaugh. You don't know why these talking points are true. You only know how to parrot them, because you specifically, you do not think. You just repeat. Exactly the same NPC concept you claim permeates the left, you do on the right's talking points. And where that is most clear is when we look at the conservative views towards Ukraine. You know, Ukraine, a country you didn't even know existed until February, and which you still can't even find on a map. A country you only hear anything about because of Burisma and Hunter Biden. So you think that the only thing about the country that ever happened was Burisma and Russia. You only know that Trump once said he's a good friend of Putin. So clearly, Putin must be a good guy, despite the fact that he's immorally invaded another sovereign country. He's having his troops commit genocide, rapes, murder, and torture under his watch. But Trump said he's a friend. So he must be a friend to conservatives. Yeah, you have that level of knowledge going on. But you know what? I bet as much as you march around screaming, we shouldn't be spending a dime on Ukraine, back in 1939 you would have been saying, we shouldn't spend a dime to help Poland. And yet, you probably still mouth off to the Brits saying, you'd all be speaking German if it wasn't for us. You think leftists have double standards? You ain't seen conservatives on Twitter. Look, here's a bit of reality for you. I stopped believing what the mainstream media reported when I saw how they reported on stories that I had personal knowledge of, and I saw how badly they got that story. To give a somewhat trivial example, I actually got quoted in the local paper once because a reporter stopped by the campus where I was going to college, and having just gotten out of my music appreciation final, I was waiting in the hall with some friends when she came up and asked us what our plans were for New Year's. When she got to me, she asked, are you planning to get drunk for New Year's? And I just kind of sarcastically and flippantly responded, I figure I'm weird enough sober. That's what got quoted in the paper. But that's not the only thing that was quoted in the paper. See, the guy right after me, when he was asked his plans, he said, my family is pretty plain, so we're probably only going to drink some champagne and watch the fireworks on Pikes Peak. Now, how did that quote come out in the paper? Something like this. I'm going from memory. This is as best as I can remember. Not everyone is planning on doing any celebrating. However, my family is pretty plain, said so-and-so. End quote. That was it. As soon as I read that in the article, I was like, that's not only not all he said, that's not what he meant. He didn't say they weren't going to do any celebrating. He said that they were specifically going to drink champagne and watch the fireworks. That's not doing nothing. And now his name's out there and his family is going to read that and say, you think we're playing? So I immediately realized that probably every time when somebody says, you're quoting me out of context in a news article, it's true. The news doesn't care about context, and that's important. Michael Crichton, the famous author, once pointed out this problem. When you read an article about a topic you're intimately familiar with, and you see how laughably absurd the whole article is, how they get basic facts wrong. In fact, often they're saying the exact opposite of what you know is true. Then you turn the page and you read an article you know nothing about, and instead of doubting what you just read, you assume they're correct about everything. When the thing you know is proven to be false, how can you trust the parts you don't know anything about? In fact, Right now, when I watch the mainstream media, I know that when they're right on a topic, it's completely by accident. But just as I apply that standard to the mainstream media, I have to apply that same standard to conservative commentators, the policy wonks, and the users on Twitter. And when I see the kinds of stuff they claim about Ukraine, things that I know for a fact are false, and they're just buying it hook, line, and sinker, then everything that they are saying is now completely suspect, and I can only conclude that the parts they are correct about in other topics are accidentally correct. These are not intellectual gurus who know what the hell they're talking about. They're moronic tape recorders who occasionally have truth shoved into their mouth before they puke it back out. They could just as easily have Putin's lies crammed in there and they'd spit those out too, which is exactly what they are doing now. I cannot associate with people who literally believe the exact opposite of reality and refuse to listen to correction, and indeed who think you're some kind of leftist if you try to correct them. Supporting Ukraine doesn't make me a libtard, as so many of these so-called intellectual conservatives have said. The fact that you have no actual meaningful responses to my arguments shows that you are the tool, not me. What are some of the lies that are being expounded by conservatives to denigrate Ukraine? Well, let's just start with Ukraine probably staged Bucha. Russia wouldn't have committed war crimes. And besides, Ukraine has been shelling innocent people in Donbass for 8 years, and no one cared about that. Why should we care about Putler now? None of that is true. Russia clearly killed innocent civilians in Bucha. There's literal video of some of it. Not only that, but we have satellite photos, not just from the government, which I know you don't trust, but private satellites that were being used on the public domain, showing where the bodies fell on the streets during the middle of the Russian occupation when there were no Ukrainian troops nearby. As for Donbass, you can simply look at the photos of Donbass today and compare them to what Mariupol looks like. Donbass still looks like a functioning city, despite this so-called 8 years of constant shelling. Russia destroyed every single building in Mariupol in a month. There's no equivalency here at all. Or what about this lie conservatives latch onto? The Ukraine war is just a way to launder money to Zelensky. We keep sending him billions of dollars to enrich Joe Biden. After all, Burisma proves the corruption. Problem numero uno. Zelensky wasn't president when Burisma happened. That was Poroshenko. Which brings up another error, because I've heard conservatives say that Zelensky entered the office broke and suddenly he has $2 billion in net worth. No, Poroshenko was the billionaire. He was the previous administration. Zelensky was elected in 2017, after Trump was in office. He had nothing to do with Burisma, and in fact, reopened the investigation when Trump asked him to. The only reason conservatives find this suspect is that the mainstream media tried to paint it as somehow the reason for the first impeachment. But for people who supposedly don't believe the mainstream media, why the hell do these conservatives fall so hard for the lies that Zelensky ever was threatened by Trump when he himself never said he felt threatened by Trump? But more to the point, Ukraine voted for Zelensky because Ukrainians were trying to get rid of some of the corruption in their government. Kind of like how Americans voted for Trump in the first place. Blaming Zelensky for Burisma is like blaming Trump for Obama's Fast and Furious policy of giving guns to cartel members and then forgetting to track them. And by the way, none of this even addresses the fact that we're not giving cash to Ukraine. We are literally giving them weapons, ammo, and platforms like HIMARS. In fact, up until now, the vast majority of what we've given to Ukraine is simply our old stockpile of weapons that we're going to be replacing anyway. All the javelins that have been blowing up Russian tanks? Those were designed in the 80s and put out in the field in 1996. This isn't new weaponry. It's older than a lot of you. We have things that we're replacing these with, and weapons don't last forever. They do have a shelf life. So we're giving them to Ukraine so that they can at least be used. And weapons have a price tag on them. They're worth billions of dollars, but we're not giving the money to Ukraine. We're giving those weapons. And furthermore, a lot of that is based on the Lend-Lease program, meaning Ukraine is going to be paying us for that weaponry, and they're going to have to return a lot of it once the war is over. Which brings up the next spurious claim that I read. 70% of the weapons given to Ukraine are just going to the black market. Now, why the hell would Ukrainians sell the weapons they need when they're being shelled every day by the Russians? This claim can only be said by an idiot who clearly didn't live in a country that is constantly being bombed. Because when missiles are incoming, you want everything you can to defend yourself. But apparently, that's too difficult a concept for the average conservative to grasp. Fine then. Do you realize how many Russian ammo dumps Ukraine has destroyed since getting the HIMARS? I know you conservatives don't know this because their heads are too far up. Okay. Ukraine has destroyed more than 50 of these ammo dumps, and that number is already a month old. You don't have that kind of firepower if you're selling 70% of the weapons you're getting onto the black market. It's simply not possible to do that effective if you're giving away the majority of what you're receiving. Now, I could go on, but I think the point is clear and this video is long enough. Conservatives are believing whatever lie makes Biden look bad and ignoring evidence to the contrary. But you don't have to make up crap about Biden. He's bad enough just being himself. You can look at the truth of what's going on and you can be honest about it. And look, let me be clear. I routinely talk to both Russian and Ukrainian citizens. This is the 21st century. You have the internet. You can do this too. And if you do so, and you're not just talking at people, but you're actually having a conversation with them, you will quickly find for yourself the difference in the mindset between a Russian and a Ukrainian. The best way I can explain it is like this. Ukrainians actually have more in common with Polish people and therefore with American culture than they do with Russian people. Russians have no problem living under tyrannical dictators. They've had Tsars for years, and then they traded them out for Lenin and Stalin. And now Putin, the same asshat in charge since 2000. Meanwhile, Ukraine actually held a revolution to kick out Yanukovych when he tried to implement Putin's ideology in Ukraine. Ukrainians are not Russians. They are westernized people. They are allies. So what good does it do us to let a westernized people get conquered and assimilated by Russia? Especially when Putin's stated goal is not just to take over all the former territories that used to be part of the USSR, but also the destruction of the West as a whole. People claim that Russia is going to be more conservative morally. They oppose the woke agenda. They oppose homosexuality, for example. Well, guess what? The Taliban also oppose those things. Are you going to be striding around Afghanistan openly declaring how awesome they are being conservative allies? Here's the bottom line. The world is never a jigsaw puzzle that fits pieces exactly nicely into the area you want to put them. Everything has pros and cons, and jingoistically saying things like, well, if the MSM supports this, I must oppose it, just makes you all the easier to fool. You do realize that if someone knows that you will not believe anything that they say, but they want to fool you anyway, all they have to do is use reverse psychology on you, and you're going to be doing exactly what they want you to do. Well, wait, I said you do realize. Well, who am I kidding? If you had that level of self-inspection, you would be rejecting the label of conservative too.